Now we should have audio. Let me pull up the street. Trying to visualize it first. Not a bad idea. Remember, it doesn't kind of look exactly like this. If you would ever want to see it on the minimum criteria of having Yesterday, like, I think we would say, maybe that's two of us, like, that's I don't have a case in it, so I'll take you to work. Yeah, I think we're gonna have to do, I think so. Go over here, over there, come. Make it look however you want. You can use Bootstrap. That's totally cool. Use whatever tool you want. If you found another UI library that you like better than Bootstrap, use that.
Is there other ones out there? They're like.
Oh yeah.
For example.
For example, there's Material UI is a good one. There's Base CSS, which isn't quite a layout one, but it does have it. There's one called Bulma I haven't really used, or Burma, I forget exactly. There's a bunch.
Almost really, people are bizarre about that one.
Oh yeah? I'm not, so.
There's some artists that might put the word galvanize, but I still like Bulma. Absolutely love it.
I like Material UI because it makes everything look really pretty and I don't have to do any work.
Yeah. That's, yeah.
Sweet.
Well, see, that's the thing, like, Material is very Google-esque.
Yeah.
Like, Google has a very strong support of Material. And what I've noticed is that everything with Google is like, if it's not backend related, they make it as simple as possible.
Yep.
So.
Yep. I like that strategy. So normally you'd have about 10 more minutes, but because today is 30 minutes shorter than the Saturday class, I'm going to cut 5 minutes activity. So, sorry. But in the next activity, we'll jump in and help you guys kind of get it finished. There is an image or a little header. You can do that if you want. You can change the header. It's up to you. This is your design. What is that? Not required. Yeah. Make sure you got a place to display the employees when we get to that point. Or his or off the counter. All right. How's everyone feeling? We all have a basic layout ready to go? Pretty much? Fist 5. How are we doing on that layout? You're almost done? Good. Okay. Well, you'll have time in the next phase to kind of tweak it a little bit while we're working on the next objective. So, y'all remember this app right here? This crazy sign up one where you could type your name, your email, your age, and some text. Hit submit, and it brings up that user, right? If I refresh, that user is loaded again, presumably from the database with this one, right? Since we're talking about Firebase, we can all make the assumption that it's coming from the database. So that's all well and good. If I look at my database, I have my information that I just put in there, right there in the database for me to get out. But you'll notice that this is at the root, right? So what if I wanted to show a bunch of users, or be able to add as many users as I wanted, and not worry about, you know, overwriting another one or anything like that? Things look a little different. So I can go ahead and delete this data in my database. Whoop, it's gone. This is a version where I can go ahead and add a bunch of stuff, right? And I can change some stuff. Change some even more stuff, right? What happens when I reload the page on this one? Okay, I get the oldest user. But if we look at my database now, those users aren't gone. Instead, I now have all 3 of those users that I entered, with the last one being this one, the Carson25. How did I accomplish that? Well, if we remember Firebase from Monday, we have a function called set that we can use off the database ref, right? So we're in Firebase, we get our instance of our database, right? So we can go ahead and use that. We have a click handler that pulls all the information from the inputs, and it just calls this database.ref function, which lets us call this .set function, where we can pass in an object and set the parameters to whatever we want, right? These are the properties inside that root. Then we have the onValue that lets us get that information back out. Okay, it's all well and good. If we want to add something in Firebase, not to the root, but as a collection of, say, child elements, so we want to store all of our users, instead of set, we simply use push. Now that I'm using push, I will get that list of users as opposed to just having one user that's always at the root. This is how you add what are called child elements to your database. They're called the children, right? So our value will still work just fine. But if we want to listen to when one child is added, instead of value, we can now listen to child added. Why don't we see, though, what this code looks like when it's running. So if I go back to this is the example I'm modifying. Let's look at our console. Oh, interesting. We have 3 objects in here. When we have value, let's go and change it. And refresh this. We get 1 object with everything. So child added is our way of being able to get all the individual children. Now we still get the oldest one for the most recently created one in our most recent member here, because the way that they're generated has can have a timestamp, and it can also has a unique key that's generated based off the time, so they're ordered pretty much in the way that you create them, and you'll always get them back in that order. So what's actually happening, if we could see it, is we're getting all 3 members here, this most recent member, but the most recent one that we've actually created will actually come in last from the database when we read it on child added, and that's the one we then leave here, right? Because there's nothing else to overwrite it. But as with value, when I add a child, I get some more code. That child added gets notified, just like the value one does, but only with the new object that was created. So remember, when I refresh the page, I have these 3 objects that are logged out, but right here on the child added handler, after I created this new user, that one was invoked, and that new child that was recently added is then displayed under the page, right? So it's a good way to listen for a specific collection. Hey, if I've got a collection of users, I want to hear when a new user is added because I need to do something. Or if I have a collection of employees, I want to know when a new employee is added, right? So what we're going to do in that that example, that employee tracker that we just started making, I want you to create a Firebase database if you haven't for it, and you need to be able to push each employee that you add with that submit button to your Firebase database. You do not need to add the child added handler yet to be able to listen and update your HTML with a list of all of the employees, but you need to be able to add them to Firebase as child elements, right? So no .set anymore, we're using .push. Okay? So go ahead and work through that. Try to add the Firebase element to your example. Try to, finish up your UI if you have time. Don't worry about displaying anything. If you finish early, you can go ahead and display the children on that page in a list, right? So we're going to spend quite a bit of time doing that. Give you all a moment to finish things up. So remember, it's going to look like this. And we're going to want to be able to add all of these individual employees to our Firebase database. You don't got to load them yet, but we got to add them to the database. here.
I didn't get started with the Firebase yet, but I forgot where to get the link that you add into your
The project overview.
where you know.
Somewhere on
It's like
project overview page, there's a gonna be.
if you go to
What is
your
the alt-
settings, you go to the project settings,
What is it?
there's a add Firebase to your web app button in the settings page. Go back.
Go down.
Oh, cool. I thought it was somewhere else.
It was-
They changed their UI and it's really irritating.
They update their UI after you've had your database to show you the statistics of your database instead of giving you the button that you need to add the database.
Confusing a
It
little bit.
literally took me like 10 minutes finally to digging for it.
I had trouble navigating that place too.
Yeah, it changes a lot. It's not very intuitive. You click on database, it takes you to all these other features.
Yeah, like
Literally
everything the database will ever do ever.
Yeah,
Not
literally don't use
database.
any of those. Like,
Yeah.
keep the database. Everything okay? Good on the layout? Worked on the Firebase part now? We got plenty of time,
Let's
so
take breath and then
make sure you get
it's
your.
like script source. Oh, is it script?
Yeah. You have the link
Okay, over here?
Already? Yeah. I just couldn't remember if it was what tag it was.
Sure, whatever you wanna call it, make a new Firebase app.
And then link it to
It's just a script with code.
Don't forget, when you create a new Firebase database, don't forget to change your rules to public true, right? Has to be true on read and true on write, or you're not gonna use it.
I actually have 3 script sources. BigQuery, my
File
own,
job,
Firebase.
yeah.
Very my own, yeah. Yeah, Firebase, BigQuery, and mine, yeah. Right, so initialize my database. Keeps adding stuff.
Script tag is pretty good, you know, right? It's in advanced file, you don't need the script tag. With that Firebase link, the script, the Firebase CDN, always contains a table, or it makes it true. Yeah, you did it.
Firebase is not.
Go all the way down, go to see all Firebase features. And click real time database.
So, I was looking at that issue that we had before, about the dot click, like how we click, right, and we click a button, it moves the hand or whatever. Apparently, dot click is only for things that are already generated on the page, and you would want to use dot on. Running click still for not the dynamic link, it still didn't work.
No.
Which I can ask somebody about later, but there is actually a difference between dot on and a reference click versus dot click. So dot on is the safer one.
Yeah, definitely. I'll probably honestly start using that now and doing that.
Unless your button's already on the page, like dot click, you can find it. But I was thinking
What, the
there is
database or
actually a difference.
to read it for the project overview?
I don't know what I understand is Firebase is not.
Alright, thanks. So that's one way to do it.
Where?
If that goes away, you can go to browser settings and just scroll down and you'll see that.
Yeah, well, in the console, it's just saying Firebase. Not, all I did was just copy and paste that Firebase link. Oh, it says copy and paste the below before your other script tags. I don't see how that would mess it up so badly, but
Because you're reading your script with a call to your Firebase before you load your
yeah.
Firebase.
never mind.
You always do all the other stuff first, and then your personal stuff last. Like same thing, the same reason you would put your reset before your own CSS, right? It's not the reset routine, but
Yeah. No point at that point.
that works for it.
Yeah.
I love how he slacked it out. So he's like, well, please put everything on flash if you can. Nobody exactly does that prevent defaulting without
It prevents the screen from refreshing
I think it's when
on
you
the
push
button click?
on the button. Yeah. So if it's the submit button in a form, what it does is the forms have an action, and that action is triggered every time you click the submit button. It prevents that action from happening. When that action happens, it refreshes your page.
What about for
Like a text box on change or something.
no, like text box if you just hit enter.
Okay.
So like my homework, if you try searching for GIF and you hit enter, it refreshes the page, thus blowing out all the buttons that you've added.
Does your submit button have a does your submit button automatically trigger the enter?
No,
The
is
inputs
there a way that would happen?
does your submit button have an event prevent default on it?
No.
Put it on that. Because if they're in a form together, especially it'll automatically trigger the submit button.
I don't think they're informed together. That's probably why.
Put it on the submit button anyway, because I don't think the text box should by default refresh page. If it does, you can try that.
Yeah, it does when I hit enter, like I'll try to hit enter and just the whole page reloads. I'm like, why? Couldn't figure I could like try Googling it and find any easy solution without like having to insert giant chunks of code. But
Try to prevent defaulting your buttons, and then always put it in your button. Just always do it visible. And in this class, it's rare we use the actual form code back. There are times though when you want them.
if you like take all of our input, like I don't know. Well, I think I don't know. I guess it was an update.
I got like no sleep last night. I worked all day.
Yeah, I went to bed at like I woke up last night.
You don't need any body moves in this one, but what do you need to do it now?
Start function, jQuery, dollar sign.
But where do you do that?
So you have a JS file?
Oh, Firebase. Oh, I got my Firebase. I'm trying to make my UI, I guess, like function. Or just like, I literally just copy and paste their form for bootstrap and update it. And copy and paste it, and update it. And added some IDs so I can call it. That's it.
Yeah, so I think that Firebase script tag. Yeah. Actually, I put your form. I got it to work. Yeah, just above that script tag. So the script tag we were above. So now we have that done. So, what are you asking about? Which variable? Okay, so it's going out of these are work out of Let's go to your web page where
There's so many things in your jQuery call, like dollar sign, open parentheses, then your fucking quote, then a hashtag. I always forget the hashtag because it's like a quote and start writing about it.
And you probably called me that weird.
Always a hashtag with the
So it is just sort of function again. If you want to hit your hit button and you click it, the form will go right to the six. So, class or not
only gonna have one submit button on the page, I would say that it's okay to use the unique identifier start net. If you were gonna have like across a large code base, multiple submit buttons, then I would use a HTTP class. But right now we're just using the ID. So go back to your HTML. This is what I want you to do actually. So make it half again.
Right, you can pull that out. Select that all.
Take that Node.js file, grab it, right over there. Now we're gonna use
What's the idea here?
don't worry about it.
Anything else?
I have an error here. An error is doing
child underscore
You need to pull the value out of that element.
So now, submit on the clip. Go to your click that button. You need to put an ID on that button. Not a class, an ID. You need to leave a class because you need to add this
adding this to the page part is not.
But the thing is funny, if you know all this stuff, you know you do have to watch it.
Yeah. So the reason, so let me explain to you.
Usually,
Or
I know how it works.
something that can be added to
Well, you have to like,
HTML.
you have like the
A class has
table,
like an ID.
right?
It's not really a selector, but it tells the browser what this is a submit button. So submit buttons have a default behavior which is submit. So you always want to prevent that default behavior using event.prevent default.
You know what I mean? That now we've hit the roadblock. How to use a table. Damn it. I feel like it might even be easier just like grab like 6 columns, and then you'll have like total bills with the ID of the total bill, and then like prepaying your updates and then that. The table header, like your table body. Okay, so your table header has a scope of column or graph. I don't know what scope is used for, but I wonder like if you give the header an ID and you like append it to that column.
Actually, that's really the only thing we're doing right now. So what I want you to do is go Google that. It's the data log.
Expression. Right? And your expression in this case is the value of the Alright, so we got that. So now what we need to do is use Firebase. Create a Firebase database? Okay. Go to the Firebase webpage and
You know how you use tables?
Okay.
Well, I've never had to update multi-line data onto a table by specific column. Yeah, I got this one already.
Also want the hashtag thing
For my table.
So what it's going to tell you is
right here. On that one. On the Firebase one.
So now you need to pull
well, I
think it pulled
all of the data out of the
Oh,
database.
sorry. Right, so I need to pull it out of the database, right? And then I just don't know, like,
What did you do in the last class?
no, I know how to pull data out of the database. I just don't know how I would structure it like this, right? Because if I have these headers, and then my body is empty. I'm gonna build out the body here, but how
you put the body into the table?
like how would I line up like the name under name, like under this zipper?
Just adding rows to the table.
That would probably be good. But you might want to add something to make
TR,
it really JavaScript.
And then as like in the order I pull the data, it will just come up. Okay.
Say for every element you pull out of the database, you're going to do a TR, and inside that TR, you're going to do,
Okay.
value.
That's a lot easier. I don't know why I was overthinking it. I'm like, I don't
No,
know how to match up.
sometimes you just need to walk through it with somebody.
Yeah, I was gonna be like, okay, so I'm gonna call this thing and try to just inject the name straight to it.
You already created this, right?
Yeah.
So each one of these is just a row.
Okay.
It's just a table row, and then inside the table row, you should have the
Build
data
out.
that you're going to provide.
Look on the right hand side of Firebase is not the database. Not database is how you get the database. So when you get called Firebase on database, you get the database out. We're not the database like Firebase on database.
That's the database on there, that's it.
I want you to add form into each of them.
What do you want?
Because what we're doing is we're grabbing the class.
Calling a function to get to that.
Each one of those has a class on it.
How do you think?
So go back to your
We have it. This gives us reference to what the source is. Remember, this gives us reference. The values in there. This gives us something else. So, for instance, put your why not put the variable in there? Oh, yeah. And then copy it. All right. So now we need to do work, right? So you can go ahead and do the push. Let's look at So look, Firebase Visual App, our database with Firebase Database, right? We have that going built into it. Let's look at the camera. What are they doing? They're not preventing them.
So go back there.
So I would put this. Okay, so you probably go like that, right? So on top of that. So we don't have A or phone yet. We just have name. So you can get rid of those, right? Yeah. So now we're just going to name. So what's different about ours versus theirs? What explicit function do we want to use? The name, right? run this code, it should store the Firebase database. Verify if that's true, and then you need to make changes so you can get the date out, the roll out, and the month
Oh,
break.
that's why, because you did it. Okay, so, alright, let me take a look at that. So I'm gonna show you.
Alright, we need to cover this real quick. Kind of go into it. Fist of 5, how we feeling on the push stuff? We're getting there, we're getting there. Okay, that's good. So if you understood set, understanding push probably wasn't too bad. If you still didn't have a good understanding of set, understanding push probably wasn't that easy, right? Because they're very similar. They just have a slight different functionality. But I'm assuming those of you who felt good about it can see in your Firebase database that now you have multiple users, right? Or multiple employees that you saved, correct? So people are seeing? That's good. Okay. So, why don't I show the next example that's going to add on top of that. So we did the push. Which is great. So here's that last example again that has push. This time, it should be updating that members list. Let me make sure. This time we have the most recent member. We can add more members in, and Firebase is not loading our members. Great. Let me look at this code really quick. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, sorry. I got ahead of myself. Anyway, this code uses push. So you can see when I do it, it creates these two users in my database with their special keys and everything. So we know that they're child data and their child collection, right? Based off of the root, instead of just setting stuff on the root. Now what I can do is take advantage of that child added function, which we're getting. It brings back a child added and replaces that most recent user panel, right? But we can also take advantage of the child added. We can get all the children and we can put them in a list. So instead of just showing the users, the most recent user, we can put them in a list right here and show all of them, right? And then show the most recent one right here. So you can see Carson at test is not here because I added Carson at test, and then the user with the name test. I'm bad at naming things, bad at coming up with colors. I'm just bad at a lot of creative stuff, aren't I? You can see that user comes in second, right? But the most recent user has been limited to test. So if I had another one, Frank at mywebsite.com, age 34. Frank is now the most recent user, and Frank came in below the test user. If I refresh, I get the same results. So there's something interesting though. In this most recent member, I only need one member. I don't need every member. I just need to know who the most recent member is to populate here. Well, as we know from our value or our child added is going to be called 3 times in total because I have 3 different members. And you can verify that by looking at the console log. You can see that I have my console user, my Carson user, my test user, and my Frank user all console logging in here, right? If I go into the code, I can add better logging so I can see how many times child added is called. Console.log child added called. Right, so why don't we go back to that HTML page and let's refresh, and we should see 3 child added calls. Child added called, child added called, child added called, right? But again, we only need the most recent user for that last panel. So there's a way we can limit how many child addeds we get back when we load the page. Okay? We only want that most recent user. We don't want to take that most recent user panel and update it 3 times because there's no reason to. So what we can do is create another handler to that child added function, but we can give it some nifty prefixes, some prefix functions, right? So what we're saying here, we have this dot order by child. We're saying in the ref, the base ref of our database, which in this database is right here, right? In the base ref, we want to order by child, so these are the 3 children, and we're passing that function date added, okay? So we want to order them by the date added, which means the value of date added that's the greatest will come first, okay? The greatest number is the most recent number. The numbers increase. Every time a millisecond passes, that number gets larger, okay? Oh, I'm sorry. They're ordered by the smallest. When you do a number ranking, a number ordering, it's the smallest comes first, the largest comes last. So the most recent user is going to be our largest number in that date added field. So if I go pull up the database again, you can see it's kind of hard to tell, but this one ends in 4633. This one is 5211, and then the most recent is 0262. And if you want to look further up to verify, you can see this is a 5 right here on the 6th digit, the 7th digit. This is a 5, this is a 6 on the 7th digit. So this is the largest number right here, right? The rest of the numbers are the same, but we know this is the largest number because we understand that that's bigger because it has bigger digits. So we need to get the last one, which in this case, because we're ordering by date added, is going to be the most recently added user because they're going to have the largest value in date added. We say we want the last one record because we only want this to fire once. And what's going to happen is on child added will literally only fire 1 time. Where this top one we just confirmed fired 3 times, this one's only going to fire once. So I can do child added with ordering, right? I should only see this 1 time in the console. So child added called will be 3 times. Child added with ordering will only be once. You see child added, child added, child added, child added with ordering. So it gives us a bit more flexibility in what we can do. Why might this be a good thing? Why would we want to limit results for certain calls? I mean, technically we're getting them all back in this call right here, in this child added, but do we know who the last user is? We have no idea, right? We're just going to get a stream of users, just one after another. We have no idea who that last user is, and if it's really expensive for us to change these DOM elements, it's not in this example, right? We do this all the time, but say it's a really complicated calculation and per user it takes 15 minutes to generate this data. We wouldn't want to do it for every user, wait the 15 minutes and do it again, right? We would just want to wait until we have the user we need and then do it once. So in this case, we're getting every user, that's great. We don't know who the last user is. We could put some fancy code in there and we could say, oh, you know, after all of our users, we'll know who the oldest user is or the most recent user is because we can do some compare stuff. But then to know that we're done with the child added calls, we'd have to like set a timer, and if we didn't get it and so soon, then we know it's the last. It'd be really complicated, right? It'd be really hard to figure out from this call, this very indeterminate call, who the last user was. But this one lets us limit to literally the last user based off of some parameter. So say I wanted to get the user by name, and we wanted to sort by name. That last user will probably be the test user, right? Because T comes after F and C. So we have Carson and Frank, and then we have the test user. So if I go ahead and do this, now my test user is the most recent member. Because if I look at my database, where I'm ordering, I'm now ordering by name, right? Name test, name Carson, name Frank. If you're doing a standard ordering, it's an ascending order, which means A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, you know, the alphabet. Alphabetical ordering for strings. Okay? So Carson comes first, Frank comes second, test comes last. Test our last user. That's who we're going to get. So order by child lets us do those kinds of orderings. It tells us in what order we want to see these. And then limit to last basically says wait until we get to the last user Then we can go ahead and update our UI. Another thing that we're doing in this example that's different than the others is we were ordering by that date added, but what the hell is date added, right? So I said it was this crazy number that came in. There's something in pretty much all programming called the Unix time, basically. And there's this time that they picked arbitrarily in the 70s that they're like, okay, well, all time is going to basically increment from that point. So that's 0. It's like January 1st, 1970.
Actually, yeah, it's actually the year that C was created.
Oh, is it?
It was I think it's 1969.
Well, there's some historical significance that I don't really know. It's something to do like that, right? It's something important was created, C language or something, and it's called the epoch time. It's basically the beginning time of all computers, really. Not actually, but how we view it. And so every millisecond that passes on your clock is 1 second further away from the epoch time. And so that's why every millisecond that passes, we get a larger number for the date, the current date, right? And that's why date added is magically larger with this crazy number. Now, how do we generate that number? There's lots of ways, but in Firebase, in that Firebase object that we get, that API that is exposed to us when we link it with that script tag, we get the database variable, and then we have some constants. So we have these objects that are exported with constant values, and what this is we have these .server value object, right? This .server value object has some properties on it which map to special values in Firebase. So there's one called timestamp. You can basically specify date added is this timestamp, and it's going to generate that for you. So this is great because it's consistent, right? We know that the Firebase database is never going to mess this up. So if we make something a timestamp, say we were to generate timestamps in Florida at the same time as we generated one in California, well, already we know that there's a time zone difference, right? If we're not careful, it's possible that the person in Florida generating the timestamp at the same time in California could have a 3-hour difference, when in reality it was at the exact same time, right? That could be a huge problem. But if we're using these special timestamps that the server is generating for us, it's probably taking care of that. Any good server is going to, and Firebase certainly does. It makes sure that that's, you know, a UTC time. It's not based off of locale or time zone or anything crazy like that. So it gives us that timestamp in a nice format, which is a number format, automatically generated for us when the data is pushed. We don't got to do anything with it, which is fantastic. And that's how we can get that date added in here so we can order by it. Okay, that was a lot. Most definitely a lot. Does anyone have any questions on the stuff I just talked about in this example? No? Cool. Well, I'm going to Slack out this code so you can use it as a reference. What you need to do in this application we've been working on so far is you need to add this onChildAdded. You need to take that onChildAdded. You need to show all of the member employees that are in your database on the page in a list somehow. If you can, you know, if you decide you want to make it fancy and show the most recent employee, you can do something like this where we have the order by. It wouldn't be a bad idea to add a date added field to all of your employees using the Firebase timestamp. Make it as complex as you'd like, right? But what's important is we should add a child added handler inside of our little example so that we can list all of those employees. So I'll Slack this out. You can use it as a reference, but spend the next 20 minutes or so kind of updating your application even more.
yes and no. It only puts, I'm missing something. This. So I was dealing with this before. First I tried just doing all the columns and then saving everything to a row. That didn't work. So I tried building each column and appending to a row and then appending the row at the end.
Let me see this much more than this is. Makes sense. You don't have to do a new column for every element. You just do a TD tag.
Well, my column was my TD tag. It's made it like a,
Oh, you just did it
yeah,
there, okay.
just so I would know what it was.
Yeah. But I think that jQuery should work for you, just construct the row and then it should all
You got it. Okay, I see. You got it.
just appending each of the TDs.
Plus, this was here. Okay, this is theoretically getting it. I'm getting my TD, giving it a value, and then appending it.
And what's happening when you run that?
It only prints the last one that was appended.
Format and everything like that. So that's not separate from distribution, it's the word.
Only giving me the last one.
Yeah. So you see, they're doing just one append. They're not doing an append for every single TD, they're just doing one for all of the values. So that makes a big difference. So I think what you're getting at mentally is
Not my wedding. So. I told my wife, I was like, do I have to go to the ceremony? She's like, I guess not. I was like, I feel like a dick though if I just show up for the reception.
Yeah, at least they let alcohol out the other.
Yes, they do. And these guys will have lots of it, so.
Yeah, that's awesome.
and you can go on and not have that. So you can catch it before you actually go. Exactly. So like in last one, we wanted to do the list.
Yeah.
And if that list when you come up with it, I just put
Compare the timestamp to actually current time.
try running that.
You know, you have got the timestamp.
So the
Someone
last
did-
one,
I
the
will-
last one, yeah.
What's up, Moses? Yeah.
Like a
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah.
You get like, weird size. You're running it every time a child is added. Oh,
This is my all of his TV tags, so it's just TV tag dot text and then the actual filing that I'm trying to do. And then I'm a pending.
Looks like I know who copied that.
that all looks fine.
Yeah, you saw that?
Back
So the
Background, that's why
Firebase timestamp.
What's your vertical showing? It's going back in the console.
Yeah.
that's why I put my name,
Oh,
position, all for every entry right now.
I don't know what that
And then it's just gonna give me their.
You just be able to pass it into Moment. So if you do Moment,
Yeah.
pass it in the microphone. And then do it.
Yeah.
Dot.
So you would bring Moment into your project using, I think either use metadata they asked for
Can
the,
you set a break for them, not child out? You just have to up it to 141. And then let it down. So you have got your child child.
there's a variable that,
Or 30 seconds.
Or 30 years, okay.
Yeah, you have a lot of binary mix.
Oh yeah. I didn't remember how that works.
Yeah, so it's not gonna come back. You didn't trial that again.
I don't have a referral code. I'll come
So
tomorrow.
sample code, you guys like that?
And you literally just schedule an interview for like whatever time you want. But I scheduled my interview like a week later. I interviewed the same day. And then they wanted me to do a second interview that same day so I could start working the next day. But that was like 2 days a week. I had stuff to do, so I was like, wait.
Yeah, but that's the same code too.
Also, my friend just gave me this one. It's like this job at Amazon. They're hiring right now.
So why don't you console log the trial snapshot, see if you can't figure out how to use it. And use that method name or like a drop down.
It just jump right in.
Or we gotta call them. And then we gotta row.
Console log that help and how do you get the value out of the trial
Okay,
snapshot?
so what is this?
That's just console log.
You just got the data and it's not above, I don't know why it's not working.
Console log that, save it, refresh the page, and see what you
The other thing I can think of is somehow like the way that the bootstrap builds their table. It's like
Oh, that could be.
they have like these row numbers here that I got rid of, and then I noticed here in every row they have a table head with a scope reference to the actual, or just giving it a number. Like I don't know if it's this, because each one of my headers has a scope column. Right, that's what I thought.
So now you know
Because the TH is just making it
right
forward.
click inside that button and add it to your node.
Because there's not like a formula or anything in the solution that I look at.
Right.
It's just saying, here, formulate the row.
Carson, how do we build tables?
He's having trouble, he can data back, but it's only doing the last one. It's only putting the last one in the sequence.
I don't know. What gets to know is you would have.
Like our snapshots are giving us back all the appropriate data on the console. But when we go to build the table, it just automatically gives us the last one. Step through it.
It's only giving you the last column.
The last
referencing the text of the column with the last value of your table. Instead of creating a new column for every single value of something next to the row. You're just overwriting the text every time.
Huzzah. It works now.
Nice job.
It is,
Table do stuff.
yeah.
There's a lot of work involved with it.
Yeah, there is. So, does our database, we're not taking, well, we haven't gotten to the next part, I'm assuming it's missing pieces. The month's work in probably.
Okay. 55, how are we feeling on this? People making progress? This one was tough. What was particularly tough about this one? Just getting it to work? So remembering all the little bits, right? Remembering, you have to do db.ref.on, child added, or if you want to sort, like just all the little functions that you have to call and stuff. It's kind of the hardest part of learning any API is just remembering all of the crap that you have to do, right? API docs are a lot of help once you're able to navigate them. Firebase does have those. So if we go here, so when you're doing this on your own out in the wild, you can go ahead and click Go to Docs. And then here they have guides. They do have examples of like adding authentication and working with the database and stuff like that, right? So how do we read and write data, for instance, from the database? They have this guide on how you can potentially do it, and you can read through this real carefully and kind of start to figure it out, right? So they have a whole bunch of documentation on Firebase. Or if you just want to look at what functions are even available, you can look at the reference, and you can go here and click JavaScript, Firebase database, because that's the one we're using, right? And you can look at like, hey, the database. What can I call on the database? You can see all of the different things you can get to. Go offline, go online, all kinds of things. Then they even have samples. Sample code that you can pull up on GitHub, right? Of all the different things. So the documentations are really, really important. You know an API is good and worth using if they have good docs. And Firebase has, from what I've seen so far, pretty decent docs. I haven't had any complaints when I've been doing it on my own, because this is how I would learn, right? So I'm new to a process. I'm very familiar with JavaScript. I don't really have any stumbling blocks on the language anymore. I've gotten past that. So how do I learn something? I find the docs first. The docs tell me how to use it. And after a while, you can read through those okay. I know they're probably going to be pretty hard to wade through as a beginner, someone who's fairly new still. But they are an important resource in anything we learn. So I would recommend doing that. And one of the things I've been planning on doing for this class is probably going to start changing soon, is instead of giving you guys direct help, it's going to be like, how could we Google this? Right? Because realistically, if you can understand that, how can you Google this? You'll find the answer to anything we do. Literally anything. So that should be something you should focus on too. When you get stuck on a problem in this class and we're not there to directly help you, the question you should ask first is, how can I Google this? Now remember, there are keywords, jQuery, JavaScript, Firebase, things that you can remember that are very specific and kind of tailor the problem to you. So, Firebase, initialize a database in JavaScript, right? Probably a good thing to Google if you want to figure out how to get that database reference and how to start using it. Things like that are extremely important. So eventually we're going to start pivoting our help towards that. How can we teach you how to Google this stuff so you don't rely on us? Because there are a lot of questions that we get asked that are like, that are good questions to ask, but it's like, well, if we can teach you how to Google this stuff more effectively, you could probably answer them yourself. So the docs are really good, thinking about the docs, and as we move into this next example, we're going to want to use the docs. But take a 15-minute break, come back, be back at, let's do 8:20, we have about 13 minutes.
So, you said not to use like the document.on click and then all the type tag that you're clicking. Oh, I don't know. I asked you about it on Monday. Maybe just something I was trying to say, and you said, oh yeah, it's not like the best way to do it. Because I couldn't, I had my code before was like, it was essentially document.on click, and then I built out my click.
Yeah, so those are good for dynamic elements if you're making, but it's not standard for like all of your members. So if you're going to be making a dynamic event, I don't know if there's actually a problem with doing it that way for everything. It's just not standard.
I had to do it this way. If not, every time I added something to my array and then recreated my array, it would delete all the handlers.
Yeah, you have to rebuild all the handlers, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that works.
Okay.
That works.
I just wasn't sure.
So I might have misunderstood you and just said something I shouldn't have said. But,
I'm like, this is literally the only way I could get it to work. Like, I tried so many things, different ways of writing it out and different ways of
it's more important that
scripting.
you solve the problem than you know, if it's the best way or something.
Okay.
What is adding name role B?
Oh. Inputs you can't use .test, you use .val. So if you were to change it to .val, it would load it back into the input.
Okay, so .val would show it.
It would, but not because it's effective, not because you want it.
Yeah.
You can change it to .val just to see. So you can see that you're still loading.
I had the ID on the wrong element. What's the thing? Now I just gotta do this one. How do you? That's weird. I guess I want to do a function for that. To pull that off. Back with number of months first.
Oh, we're about to do that. We're not there. So, see how it loaded up in there?
Yeah.
It's not quite where we want it,
Yeah.
right? So what we need to do is build an element and inject it in there. So So you're gonna have to do something like that.
Yeah,
But,
that's the
oh, this is usually messy, like you have to have some, you see, right here, it builds those fans and then a fan
Oh,
that,
yeah, I
right?
was curious what that was. I saw that you did, right here, right, well, so you plant all these years.
Yeah.
And that's what you did.
Yep. It injects it right there, and that, this thing I'm doing, it just puts it right in there.
Okay, and that's what this, the current, I see the current employee.
Yep, yep. So whatever is below this thing, yeah, you just append it in.
Okay. And you have to do these things.
Yeah, that's just good.
Okay. Maybe like copy this, put it in.
So you don't need that part, because you already have the HTML, right? You just need to tell it to dynamically generate the HTML and puts it in your HTML. So you go to the top of yours, you have your list, right?
Yep.
So right in here, you're going to have to inject new table rows inside the table body. So you have to create a row, and then you have to for each piece of the, the name and all that stuff, you have to generate a new column. But you can't do it there. That's static, right? It's not dynamic. If we can do it in JavaScript. So what would a new row look like? If we did it in HTML, what would it look like? Not like physically, what would it look like in terms of the code?
In the JavaScript. Going through the left hand to HTML to down the resolution.
What's an HTML table look like though? What elements are it?
We get like another row.
Is it called row? It's called the object. Table. So you have a table row, and inside the table row you have what?
Your classes, your IDs, so on, something like that.
You can put classes IDs, yeah, but then there's specific elements. Table detail, we like to call it. So for every element, or everything we have in the name, role, start date, and monthly, we have to have another key. We have to put those in the row, and put the row in the table.
Okay, so I gotta do that all in one.
All in one go. Yeah, very similar to that. Instead of span, it'd be TD, and instead of div, it'd be TR.
Okay.
And then you would add that into your table body.
So I do child snapshot, val, plus, but then if you look now, number date, I do my April, so I have to put it there. And instead of span, TR.
Instead of the div, it'd be TD.
Okay.
So those are the table elements. So if you can't remember what they are when you're doing it or whatever, just Google HTML table and look at the examples of what it's required. Okay. Yeah. Can we get close to that point? The other guy wrote something, all the algorithms that analyze all that stuff. Oh, you were walking at the same time.
I found something interesting. I haven't figured out how to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in the demo where they show it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you can stop it. Sometimes you don't. For some reason, I found console logging it. if you get 2 or 3 of the clicks,
Multiple click handlers.
and that's what's happening.
So they
you
stop
click
each
on
other
it,
and stuff.
So it stops and starts in the middle. And I found how to limit it a little bit, but not completely. I still see it. And also I see, like in mine, sometimes it adds more than, it only adds 10 gigs, but it adds it several times.
Okay.
I haven't figured out
It's the
what's...
multiple click handlers, probably, or multiple
Same
handlers
thing,
or
yeah.
something.
I haven't figured out why it's adding the same, it's probably the same thing. It's for some reason the trigger's not
That'd be a
triggering
problem,
properly.
yeah.
And I haven't figured out how to stop it.
Those bugs are tricky. They really suck.
I mean, I was thinking I probably would put it if, you know, I clicked it once. But then I gotta figure out how to
Remember
reset that guy. And
Yeah.
especially the animate and unanimate.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you got this still, but with that double click, it switches it back to still really fast.
Yeah.
And you can't even see it going, except if you put console log in there and
Right.
watch it forward.
Right.
And I saw that coming out. Oh, it's still, hey, wait a minute, why did you get 2 of them? What's wrong? One needed 6.
Wow, that's not good.
That's because I figured it out because I put the click handler inside the for loop.
Oh, okay.
I took that out of the for loop so that it wasn't being added. So that fixed part of it. Still, there's
Something else.
something else in the click or in the way the keys are being activated or something.
Yeah.
Maybe it's, oh no, because we're just saying click, so maybe we can get on down or something like that. But you can get that in the mouse click.
Yeah.
Well, you probably could.
Yeah, well, when you click down, that's when it triggers. And then there's mouse up. When you let go, it triggers.
Yeah,
So
see,
click
that's
is
what
both of those put together, basically.
So, maybe you could just use on down, mouse on down, and maybe that might fix part of it.
Try.
I gotta figure out what I want to do, because I want to work on Firebase for the new project.
Yeah.
New code.
Firebase is cool.
I did that so far. I don't know if that's right. Missing something, I don't know.
So you don't need a TR around all of that. You need one TR around all of it, and then a TT.
Oh, okay. So I just get rid of all this then? Or did get rid of all the TRs? What do I put in place of those?
So if you have a TD at the end here, that could be the end of the TR, and then the rest of these could be TTs. But this isn't complete because you're missing like the append and the beginning of the TD and stuff. So it's close. Reverse the TR and the TD, and then
Oh, so these all need to be TDs, these TRs, and then these are TRs
Yes.
at the end.
Yes.
And then you start with a TR.
You start with a TR, yes.
Okay.
Nice work, man. Alright. We're going to jump back into this. We have a couple people still out, but they're unfortunately going to miss out because we got to get going. Okay, so I've had several people already ask me, how do we take these Firebase timestamps and turn them into legitimate dates so we can determine how many months have passed or something along those lines, or even just see the date that it was created if you really wanted to. There's lots of ways you could do it. JavaScript has these primitives, okay, so they're similar to like our booleans and all that, called a date. If you want to play with a date, you can just open up your console, do new date, and what it does is it prints out the current date at this exact moment that you did that. When you do new date, that is the time at this second of the date, and it even gives you your offset. So in Arizona, we're 7 hours before the GMT time, which is like the Greenwich Mountain Time or whatever, which is the standard UTC 0. So that's the time that everything's based off of in terms of time zones. So we're 7 hours before that. So if you add 7 hours to our current time, that's UTC time. So a lot of times when we're programming, everything uses UTC to be standard. You'll see something, it's like, hey, I did this at, noon, but it says 7 p.m. for some reason, because it was UCT time. It's not really 7 p.m., it's 7 p.m. in terms of the standard time across the world that everyone's kind of using. But anyway, if I take this new, if I make a date, var time, and I did this date.now, what I'm going to get is a crazy number, right? Very similar to what we're seeing with that timestamp. Now if I take a new date and I put time in there, I'm going to get the time that I put in that variable. It's going to generate it, and every time I do it, you'll see it's exactly the same. It's going to generate it based off that Unix time. So technically, we could take the timestamp from Firebase, pass it into this new date, and voila, you have the date. However, that date object kind of sucks. So there's this library, among others, but this one's really good, that people use called Moment.js. And Moment.js is really powerful, and we're going to be using it in homeworks and for the rest of the class, basically. But it's going to help you finish this activity, so we can determine the number of months that have passed and stuff like that. So if you want to play with Moment and just see what it does, if you go to Moment's webpage and you just open up your developer console, I'll do it in Chrome. If I just open up Moment in the development console, there's this Moment object. This crazy Moment object, which you can see right here with the date that's being shown represents now. So if I did moment to string, I actually get the date at this exact time, at this exact moment. What's cool is you can see everything this moment object can do. So if I do moment like that, I get this crazy object. We haven't learned about them yet, but if you open up this proto object, there are a ton of things you can do. An absolute ton of things, right? So for instance, I want to get a nice formatted date. I can use this format, and I can do things like year, MMDD. This is going to print today's date at this time is a 4-digit year dash 2-digit month dash 2-digit day, right? So 2018 9/12. Okay, that's cool. Well, I want to add the hours and the minutes and then AM PM. Okay, that's cool. I can start building these cool strings, right? Now it's not the military time with the lowercase hh. So there's a ton of this string formatting you can do on these dates, which is really quite powerful, you know? So, okay. Let's say I have a time variable, right? Equals new date. Or let's just say it equals date.now. So we know that if I print time, it's going to be this crazy integer, right? Well, what can I do with moment? I can even print to the second if this is happening. And that is the time right there that this timestamp came from. And it doesn't change, right? If I take my time out of this, I have 3 S's, I need 2. If I take my time out of this, it's going to show now's time. And this is going to change every second. So format, pretty powerful. And you can see that Unix timestamp we can just dump into the moment function, call format, and we're good. Okay, well that's great. But what if I want to take that time function and I want to see how many seconds have passed since now? So that happened at some point in the past. That's how many milliseconds? 86 seconds, basically, that have passed. Or if I want to see a positive number, 106 seconds have passed. How do I know it's seconds? If you divide it by 1,000, because it's coming back as milliseconds, you get the seconds that have passed. So a little over a minute and a half has passed. But what if I want to see it in seconds? Can I do that? How do I see that? Yes, I can. You tell it I want to see it in seconds. 129 seconds. Let's see if minutes works. Yep, sure does. Oh, days doesn't work. What if I want to take an arbitrary time, say the time that I started working somewhere, and I want to see how long it's been between that time and now? Well, let's make a variable higher time, set it equal to moment, and let's just say our date is 2014 -01-01. So January 1st, 2014. Well, I can take a diff of the now and the higher time. Ooh, I don't really care about that number. That's in milliseconds, right? That's probably not going to be good. But I can see how many months have passed. 56 months since then. It's pretty easy to do, too, with this moment library. I can even take... This one is cool. I just found this when I was playing with it. If I can get my cursor back. There's this toNow function that tells you in text how long it's been. It's been 5 years. Almost. Right? 4 and some odd years since 2014, January 1st, 2014. It's pretty crazy. So there's a ton you can do with this moment library. You can format stuff. You can print it as JSON if you wanted to. You can get it back as a native date object. So if you wanted to use that native date, now it's a native date. So if I were to do type of, it says object, but it's a date. Date is an object, so it comes back. However, if I were to do that with this toJSON, it says it's a string, right? So you can convert it to a bunch of different formats. You can add time. So if I take higher time and I do, if I take higher time and I add, let's just say a day. Right? So 1,000 milliseconds times 60 seconds. Right? That's a minute. Times 60 is going to be an hour, times 24. Gives us January 2, 2014. So it even does all the crazy math for you if it needs to. You could probably pass in another moment. See if that works. Let's well, I'd have to make it days. Let's see if I can do 7 days. Yeah, there you go. So now that higher time, we've added 7 days to it. We can keep doing that. Notice the higher time is actually changing. Can add years. Again, there's all kinds of functions you can do with moment. The point being, we can totally manipulate time very easily with moment.js, as opposed to trying to do this manually and figure out the math, because the math's hard. So how do I get moment.js into my application? If you come to the main momentjs.com, you go to the docs page, there's some where to use it. Okay, well I want to use it in the browser. Well, I'm going to need the source code, so I can use one of these CDNs. Well, from this CDN, for instance, there's a whole bunch of CDN links that I could potentially use, right? So here's information about how it's used. I don't generally use this when I use CDN.js. Go to CDN.js, you're going to get a long list of all the different files Moment has, but at the very bottom, you'll get actually moment.js. Right? And that's how you can go ahead and paste it into your application as a source tag or a script tag. right? So you just go to the docs, where to use it, go down to browser, find a CDN link, go ahead and add that to your page. And you've got it. You've got Moment. So, activity number 20 is a quick exercise using Moment, trying to transform dates and make them look how we want them to look, and kind of playing with diffs and stuff like that. So, we're going to go ahead and do activity number 20. We'll go over it in about 10-15 minutes. We're going to play with Moment.js. Moment.js.com. I'll select this link out too.
You have to go out and get the Moment.
This week. Yeah. It's like this till the end now. Every week's a new tech, a new piece of tech. Finish. You have a week to work on. So we'll have Node. Node I think is 2 weeks. It's Node week 1, and then it's Express, which is still Node. And then it's like MySQL, and then SQLize, and then Mongo, and then just like new tech, and eventually get to like React. What Project 2? Then I think we do React and some like data structure stuff, and then Project 3. Yeah, it's pretty hardcore. All right, how's everyone feeling about this? Fist 5. The Moment.js stuff. Good. Everyone seems to be feeling okay about it. So why don't we look at the examples and see what we can do with this bad boy. So it was okay if you didn't finish it. The primary purpose of this example is just to show what we can do with it, right? Because we can do a lot with Moment. So to convert a random date into 3 other date formats. So how do we do that? We can use the .format function, and then we can kind of determine what we want to see. Say you want to see the month / date / year, 2 digits. You can go ahead and do that. mm/dd/yy. How do you know what these formats are? You look at the docs for Moment. Really, that's the only way to know. There's a lot of standardization among date formats, but you really just have to look at the library that's implementing it to know for sure. So say I want to see the month as its name. So MMM would be like a 3-letter abbreviation, and I think 4 M's would be the full name of the month. So in this case, if it was August, it would be AUG. And then we can see the date, and then we can see the year, and the hours, minutes, and seconds. Right? Then X. I honestly have no idea what X prints. Why don't we look at it? Looks like it prints the Unix time, right? So the DO prints that the day of the month, and then the O tells it it's gonna be like 23rd, 24th, 25th. Let's look at the diffing. Okay, so we need to determine the time in years, months, and days between today and the random date. So we can use that diff function. So if we use to now, we get the nice little string, so many days, so many months, so many years. Or we can take the converted date, so that special date, based off the random date in the random format, right? And we can diff it from today and get the number of years. Or we can diff it from today and get the number of months, or diff it from today and get the number of days. The important point being here is there's tons of ways that are pretty easy to use to get a diff between 2 times in Moment. Determine the number of days between the random date and February 14th of 2001. So we can go ahead and take Moment, pass in the string February 14th, 2001, and create a new moment with it, a new date, right? We don't have to give it this random format. We can, but it doesn't matter. Probably just pass it in and it'll be fine. It'll figure it out. We can take the date, that converted date that we have, and we can pass in the moment of our new date that we generated, and we can see how many days are between them, right? So we use this .diff function. So, convert the random date to Unix time. We use that X format, right, like we did up here. And then we get that Unix timestamp that we're seeing in Firebase. Or if you want to see other types of formats, DDDD and DDD, let's see what those print. So the day of the year looks like it's DDD, the 3 Ds. And then the 4 lowercase d's is the day of the week. So there's lots of different ways we can manipulate dates fairly easily with Moment. And that was kind of what this activity was all about. How many ways can you use Moment, and why is it powerful, right? Any questions on this Moment stuff? This is one of those things where it's tough to learn all the things you can do with Moment. It's tough to learn how to use Moment, but it really becomes important to understand how to navigate their docs because they can tell you how to do anything with a date with this library, right? So what I want you to do, you're going to take Moment.js, you're going to integrate it into that app we've been working on. You're going to determine the number of months that someone's been working so you can calculate how much they've been compensated since they started working. All right? So we're going to finish our app up over the course of the next 10-15 minutes. To make things easier on yourself, when you save the start date in your database, it is always easiest to save it as its Unix time. There's no easier way to store a date than as its Unix time. So you might have to convert it when it comes out, but with Moment that should be a lot easier than if you did it by hand. So if you want to get rid of some of them, you can get rid of some of these things up, right? X. Yeah. That way you don't have to worry about changing a whole bunch.
Yeah.
What's the easy at Moment?
Yeah. Yeah. I have to show you what it's doing.
Oh, I meant this was to say all.
The only thing that's really
Okay. I was just
now that you have so many
Reading the doc,
similar,
yeah.
get it right.
Right now, they can only support or no, it doesn't only support that. It's because it's primarily when you're using the symbol. If you use that, you do the same thing as string. You like the doc. You know your base point. So scroll down to string section. That's what you use when you know your format.
Oh, so if I put my format in Slido,
So are you using?
I'm not using that. I'm using this one.
Oh, okay.
So if I put this one,
Yeah, but then you have to pass that more. You have to pass it.
yeah, I am.
Yeah, so it's string section. No, we start with that.
You start with
Yeah, so the string. Yeah, so it's coming into the string. So if you pop it into the string and use the string section, then it shouldn't.
All right. In the interest of time, because we do have a lot left to do, I'm gonna go ahead and go over the solution. They don't give you a lot of time to go over the solution, so I kind of gotta blow through it really quick. But I'll slack this out so you can look at it. All right. So we set up our Firebase config. This is the JavaScript file. Okay. So the index HTML is just a bunch of HTML, and then we're calling out to our JavaScript file. So we have our config. This is to my Firebase database, and we initialize the app with the config, and then we go ahead and we pull out our database reference, right? So when we add a new employee, a few things we got to do. We have to do our event prevent default, or you're going to have a whole lot of fun. When it refreshes your page and nothing happens. Then we have to pull our values out of the input boxes, right? Now the interesting one is that start date. We're kind of determining what the format is, and we can, at the time of pulling this date out of the input box, pass it into moment with our format, and then we can even take that a step further and get the Unix time from it. So this start time is actually a Unix time. Do you need it to be the Unix time? No, but it's way harder to store a date string than it is to store the Unix time, so it's a good idea to do that, right? So this is just that moment library, pulling it directly from the input and putting it into moment and then formatting it. And then the how much you're paid is pulled out right here. We go ahead and create a new object that has our name, role, start date, and the rate. We push it to Firebase with the database .ref.push, right? Because we want to have multiple employees, not just one. And then we can go ahead and alert, hey, employee successfully added, and clean some stuff up. Now on our child added, we get the child out, we pull all the variables out, the name, the role, the start date, and the rate. So what first thing we have to do is reformat that Unix start date as a month, day, year date, so we can make it look nice, right? That's in a list that we have. And then we can calculate the difference in months between now and when the employee started. So we're going to have to use that moment diff. We can go ahead and we can create a new moment object with that start time and that start date, right? And we can calculate the months difference between those two dates, today and when they started. That'll give you a positive number that'll represent how many months have passed. And then build is just going to be the months times their rate, right? Because that's their monthly rate. And you can go ahead and display that too. And then we can build a nice table row, right? Create a new table row in jQuery, and we can just append TD over and over and over and over again. Now, if you create one single TD and use .text, you'll replace the text every single time and end up with one TD with the build amount. And that's it. So it won't look very pretty because you'll just see a random number. So, yeah, Rolando can confirm. So you need to create a new TD for every single value that you want to append into that TR, that table row, right? So right here, this is actually a more advanced CSS selector. You don't necessarily need if you gave the tBody an ID or a class or something, but it's basically saying for the employee table, select the tBody that's an immediate child. That's what this means. And then append to that the new row. So if there were two tBodies, a tBody and then a tBody following it, it would pick the first one. And append to that the new row. There would be two tBodies because that's invalid HTML, but you know, crazier things have happened. So, any questions on this? We'll slack out the solution. I know I had to go quick, but we don't have a whole lot of time. Alright. So we'll select that out in a moment. Next exercise we're going to work on how easy is it to determine time scale mathematically, right? So if I give you a time, say 3 a.m., and I say every 17 minutes there's a new train coming into a train station. The current time is 7:12 p.m. When's the next train? It's not easy to do right off the top of your head. Now, what I want you to do is work with your table and solve that exact problem. And then we're going to talk about it, how you solved it. Without moment. Do this with math. I just slacked out that question. I want you to solve this with math. This is like good old-fashioned pen, paper math. Do it with your group. Figure out if you can find out what the answer is. And then from there, we'll talk about it, okay?
So I guess if you looking for hours, but what I was trying to think is to get the current time, so it's 3 a.m. to 7 p.m. Yeah, and like 20 something hours. Yeah, good. I didn't mind that actually. To 7 p.m. I guess I would convert that to like military time or something. Yeah. Well, you want to look all the minutes. You want to. What's 7 by 60? What's 7 by 60? Well, multiply 3 by 60 and then figure out the difference. Use add 12 for military time. PM. Oh yeah, 19 12. Take that remainder off the first part of it. So every 60, 51 out of every 60 minutes. So now you have half
could be wrong. Yeah, next time I would count like 9 minutes every hour. That would be so every 2 hours you get one more train theoretically.
I've got the link. I'm gonna post that. What time are we doing that? The link for the checkpoint?
If you've got it ready, I'll let you know. We've got about probably 9:20.
9:20.
We'll do it 9:20.
9:20, and then you want us to lock up? So you want us to go over the checkpoint answers and then lock up? Okay, perfect.
That'd be great. Yeah. Do you remember the code to turn on the alarm?
I've got it stored in my in a Google Drive document.
Okay, good. Okay, cool. All right. Did anyone solve it? 14 minutes until the next train. Who else got that? Any other group get 14 minutes? Okay. Okay, we don't need that. We need how many minutes? 14. 15? So it was 14 minutes. 14 minutes exactly. But it's a pain in the ass to calculate that, isn't it? It wasn't easy. So how can you calculate this? Well, it's 3 a.m., 7:12 p.m. Okay, so there's a 16-hour difference, right? Because 3 a.m. to 3 p.m. is 12 hours, and then add 4 more hours to get to 7. So you start there. 16-hour difference, it's like 960 minutes. Add 12, because it's 7:12. Divide that by 17, you get 57.18 something. Drop off the 57 and times that by 17. Then you get 3 minutes. 17 minus 3 is 14. 14 minutes left, right? But it's a pain in the ass to calculate that. It's really not a fun thing to do. So, I'm going to slack out some code for you that kind of goes over that. I want you to talk amongst yourselves as a group. Try to understand how these calculations work. Moment does this for us. And this train homework that we're going to be doing will require this kind of math. Could be used through Moment. You might have to do some of it. But I'm going to slack out this example. And I want you all to play with it together. Walk through it. Understand what's going on. And make sense of those mathematical calculations used to determine the time between trains.
getting answers for me. So basically saying for that one, how to get the answer is that you get the minutes off of the current time. You do basically the minutes are 116, so you do 16 mod 17, gives you the remainder, you divide it, which is 2. And so it becomes every 7 minutes, you do 7 minus 2 is 5. You add 5 to 316, it turns into 321, and the next train arrives at 321. I don't fully understand how that answer came to be. Okay, so you get the minutes off of the current time. So you basically divide the minutes by how often the train comes, and take the remainder out of it. So divided by 7. 16 divided by 7, and there's also 7. Yeah. So I don't know 16 divided by 7 off the top of my head, but it has a remainder of 2. That's really what it's taken
2
into.
times 7, which is 14. 14 minus 16 is 2.
Yeah. So then 2 would be the remainder.
Yeah.
So if the train comes every 7 minutes, then how does the remainder from that?
7, because that means 2 minutes have passed from the time that so you want to figure out how many minutes have passed, and how many minutes and seconds you have left. So you got to subtract how many minutes have already passed. That's 2. So you subtract that from 7, which gives you 5. And then you add 5 to the current time, and that gives you the time that
Sort of makes sense. It still doesn't fully understand it. Like if I could have used that math to do that last thing, it would have been super easy. But it's like, that's like mathematics. All we have to know is the whole number thing.
All right, so this example should help you on your train homework when you're determining when trains are going to come in, how long they take, all that fun stuff. Calculating differences in time really sucks, so figuring out how to do it is good. Using tools to do it for you is even better. It's a lot of work, and you know, it's not standard base 10 math, right? Because every hour is 60 minutes, so makes it a lot harder to reason about. Anyway, so what's coming up for the next couple of weeks are our first projects. So the first projects are group projects. You'll be in groups of 4. Everyone's in a group, and we have those, and I'll slack them out in a moment. basically what it's going to be is build whatever you want, really. I won't be here on Saturday, so Saturday when you come up with your project plan and all that, you're still going to want to Slack it to the TAs and myself as one message, so all three of us should be included. But you're going to come up with something, whatever you want, that you think you can get done reasonably in 4 class sessions in effectively 2 weeks. There are some requirements. So you have to use at least 2 APIs. I would encourage you to use at least one new one. So if you use something that we've used before, like OpenDB or whatever, you know, the OMDB, or if you use the weather stuff, or one of those that we've used in class, that's fine, but try to use a new one as well. You're going to have to use Ajax to pull that data, right? There's no other way for us to get it. If you figure out how to use the Fetch API, great, good for you. That's an improvement over Ajax if you ask me, and I'll allow it in the projects. You have to utilize at least one new library or technology that we haven't discussed. So not including the API, use something new to tie in. So Moment, for example, would qualify for this if we hadn't talked about it in class. So it doesn't qualify for it. You got to use a new one like that, a library that you can import in that's like Firebase or like Moment that you can use to extend your application to make it even better. Your UI should be polished and clean, okay? We don't want, you know, basic styles. At least have Bootstrap with some theming in there. It shouldn't look like, you know, week 1 kind of homework, right? It should look like you've been doing this for a couple of months, which we have, and we've done a lot, and a lot of you can make some really good stuff. There has to be good quality coding standards. Your code better be formatted. When the TAs are looking at this, you know, Chris, Stephanie got to read it. There's a lot of code and a lot of projects, and they don't want to read through crap. So make sure you take your time to format that stuff and make it look good. The better it looks, the easier it is to read. The easier it is to read, the better grade you're going to get. Because, frankly, they're not going to wade through a bunch of crap. You know, why would they? It sucks. So use Prettier, use Beautify, use those extensions we can find in Visual Studio Code, or just come up with some good rules for how you're going to do stuff. Make sure your formatting is consistent. Your indentations should be consistent. Everywhere you use a function should have the same indentation rules. Okay? They shouldn't change just because you decided 5 lines down that they're different now. So make sure it's clean. It's easy to read. Have good rules on scoping and naming and how things should be made. Do not use alerts, confirms, or prompts. If you're going to use something like that that pops up, use a modal. Use a Bootstrap modal. Find other ways to do modals. Build your own kind of pop-up system with CSS. But do not use alerts, confirms, or prompts. They look ugly. They're horrible. There must be some sort of a repeating element that you generate dynamically. Okay, like a table or a list or a bunch of columns or something. Right? You have to show that you can use jQuery to generate dynamic HTML. You must use at least Bootstrap or some other CSS framework to help you get your CSS done. Now the caveat is, if you can make your CSS look professional, like one of those, then okay, you don't have to use one, but it better look good. It better not be just basic styles. You didn't really do much, right? It has to be deployed with GitHub pages, or if you can figure out how to use the Firebase deployment tools, you can use those too, but it's got to be deployed so we can get to it, so we can show it here in class live. Because that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to come up in front of the class, pull it up on the web, and work with it, and it's got to work. And there's got to be some form of user input validation. So you're going to have a form or something that I can enter data into, and, you know, if it's not the right format, it'll tell us. Either there'll be a warning or an error message or something. So if I have to enter a date, for instance, it's not in the proper string format, it better say, hey, this is an invalid date. You can't do this. Right? Before it talks to Firebase or before it talks to the API. So you have to do some work there to make sure that your API has good validations and it's got a good user experience. So there's a lot to this project for sure. But you get 2 weeks to work on it in a group of 4. So you have a lot of time to get a lot done. You can split up the tasks and kind of figure things out that way, right? So I'm going to Slack out these instructions and I'm going to Slack out the groups you're in right after this. But what we're going to do before we leave class today is another one of those fun checkpoints. Yeah, everyone seemed real happy about that. So what we're going to do is Chris is going to Slack out a link here in a moment. These checkpoints, again, they're not quizzes for you. They're pretty much to assess where we as the instructional staff are at and where you guys are at in terms of your overall learning. How fast is the class going? Are we fair in what we expect you to learn in these 8 weeks? And I know all of you are going to say no, but that's not totally true. So these things don't hurt you. They have no negative repercussions to you. They only help you because it helps the class get better. It'll help us get better. So take it. When you're done, you can go.
But also, I'm going to be going over the answers at the end of class for office hours. So if you want to stay and go over those, feel free.
Yep.
Yeah, the answers to the
Quiz is slacked out, so take it. You got 10 minutes.
I'm also going to put the groups as an announcement on bootcamp spot.
Okay.
So that way they have the reference and always go back to you.
Okay. I'll post them in Slack.